Hi, welcome back to the channel. So today, as it's Tuesday, and Tuesday I tend to have my non-explicit book review style content, I wanted to talk to you guys on something that I talked about last week, actually, which is American comics for fantasy readers. Now, I'm going to focus this video on one specific comic series, which is called The Last God. Or actually, technically, the Fellspyre Chronicles is the name of this is the cover for the collected edition. The Fellspyre Chronicles is the first, it's Fellspyre Chronicles book 1, of which the story is called The Last God. So this is by, and I'm going to read it straight off the cover so I don't get anything wrong, Phillip Kennedy Johnson, who's the writer, and then the art team is Riccardo Federici, Sonny Cho, Alan Passalaqua and Arif Prianto. Sorry for the cat here getting in the way. You'll be able to see a lot of cattail in this video maybe. So the Fellspyre Chronicles is a 12-issue series. It can be read completely standalone, although there are two single issue kind of side stories. So think about this in the same way that if you're looking at your a fantasy series, this is like The Last God, or Fellspyre Chronicles Book 1, as the hardcover is called, is basically the first book in the fantasy series. And then you've got these two single issues, which are basically novellas. This one is unfortunately this doesn't fit my theme of Self-Pub September, because while this series is creator owned, so Phillip Kennedy Johnson and his team own the world of the Fellspyre Chronicles, the DC Comics published it. However, the best way to read it is going to be to buy yourself the hardcover, or just pick up the collected edition on Kindle, as Kindle is where all digital comics live now, pretty much, because it's not on any of DC's subscription services. So, what is The Last God? Which is what I'm going to try and call it from here on out, rather than the Fellspyre Chronicles and confuse everyone. So, it was originally published as The Last God, issues 1 through 12. So, 30 years ago in the world of The Last God, a band of heroes saved the world from the plague of flowers, which is basically a magical plague that turns anyone who is afflicted into a murderous kind of plant zombie monster. They saved the world by climbing the Black Stair and facing off against a dark god called Mol Utep. However, 30 years later, the heroes of this band have become kings and queens, and the kind of the leader of the band, Tyr, and his wife Seanthe, who is also one of these heroes, they're king and queen of the kind of the human world, and they have this massive capital city called Tirgalad, named after Tyr, and they have slaves reenacting the final battle against Mol Utep in the gladiatorial arena, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of them saving the world. So what happens is Tyr recognises and sees something strange in the gladiator who's playing him, and says he has to leave. And we find out through that first issue that Tyr and the band of heroes did not in fact save the world, but they made kind of a dark bargain with Mol Utep. So, and Mol Utep basically has come to collect and said, look, you know, I said you would be kings and queens, and you have been, but now I'm bringing the plague back and I'm going to destroy the world. So that's kind of the setup. And then we meet along the way a set of new characters who are... so we spend some time with not just the old heroes from the previous, the fake heroes, as it were, from the previous campaign against Molutep, but we also meet a new band of heroes who are kind of... they've been raised in this world to think of the... band of heroes and this kind of heroic quest as like as history, and they kind of find out as it goes, you know, how they've been betrayed and lied to, and realize that somebody has to climb the Black Stair again and really defeat Molutep. So it is a very traditional kind of fantasy story in terms of it's this kind of epic quest. But the thing that I really like about it is that you get the contrast of the Phillip Kennedy Johnson showing you flashbacks of the original quest. So, you know, how awful a person Tyr was, how poorly he treated Cyanthe, how their kind of fellowship of heroes originally fell apart, and all this sort of stuff. It's really interesting. The contrast as well, like I say, between these kind of old heroes who are very, very flawed characters, especially Tyr. I think Tyr is a fantastically written, flawed character. And then you get Eyvinder, who is the gladiator from the slave arena, who ends up joining this new band of heroes. And he's kind of the opposite of Tyr in many ways. So he aspires to be what the legend of Tyr said he was. And he kind of pulls along these characters, and they all the time they're kind of going like, right, we'll leave Eyvinder here, like he's just going to get in the way. And you find out that he also turns out eventually to be important to the story for many different reasons. There's a lot of really good foreshadowing in the comic. So they talk a lot about Hakon, the betrayer, and you don't even meet him until like quite far through. And then when you meet him, he's very much not the character that you would expect. And then, you know, what happens to him through the story. Did he betray them, or did the original heroes, betray Hakon? I'm sure you can guess. If you read even a few pages of the book, you can see how awful some of the original characters are. So, yeah, so Fellspyre is... the art is incredible, by the way. I'm going to put some shots of the art kind of up here, and I'll flash through those kind of for the rest of the review, maybe. It's barely even a review. This is more of a recommendation. So I see manga is massive among fantasy booktubers. So, you know, Murphy Napier is obsessed with One Piece, and Daniel Green is reading Berserk, and Philip Chase, frequent commenter on the channel, is reading Vagabond and Vinland Saga. But American comics are often something that booktubers are interested in and have read, but they don't really talk about. So I'd really, really like to recommend out here The Last God. The Last God has everything that you are looking for in a kind of grim, dark fantasy tale. It's not It's not unnecessarily brutal, but we are, the quest takes place both 30 years ago and now in a world ravaged by this plague of flowers. The characters are very, very flawed, not kind of. They're flawed beyond what you'll often see in a lot of books. And especially, like I said, these original heroic characters. My favourite character is probably Cyanthi. She's really, really interesting. She starts off as kind of this wide-eyed, innocent girl in the flashbacks, but you see the kind of grizzled combat veteran and the survivor of what seems like years of abuse from Tyr. And of course, you can't say that Tyr is your favourite character because he's awful, but he's incredibly well written and well drawn. And that's well drawn also from a visual aspect, in that the book is absolutely stunning. The weird thing about The Last God is that I think that the internal artwork is a lot better than the covers, which is usually not the case in comics. Usually the comic will be the thing that draws you in, and the internal artwork will be good, but not, above and beyond. And I think that The Last God is above and beyond, some of the best looking Western comics I've ever read. So if you're used to looking at, say, for example, manga, and how incredibly detailed and emotional that artwork can be, you won't miss anything of that from The Last God. One other thing that I'll say for The Last God is it's only 12 issues. The story does start, finish, and end. There's clearly ways for Phillip Kennedy Johnson and his team to continue, although when I looked it up, basically they've all said, that they want to do it, but they're all really busy. And Phillip Kennedy Johnson is writing a lot of stuff for DC right now, so I can absolutely see why he's so busy. And he might not have time to dedicate to something which I imagine is a lot more difficult to write, because it's, his own fully generated secondary world, whereas the DC stuff he's writing is, it's set in Metropolis or Central City or whatever, and those are those are our modern world, just with a superhero spin. So who would I recommend The Last God, the Fellspyre Chronicles to? I would really say that anyone who likes fantasy books would really recommend it. I'd really recommend it to you, especially if you like modern fantasy. So we're looking at like Sanderson or Ryan Carhill, but there are some aspects of classic fantasy there. So if you really enjoyed Philip Chase's books, you might get a lot out of this too. So for example, we've got there's a lot of songs in the book. Songs are a huge part of the world building and the magic, and there's even musical notation in them, so you know how they play in some of the back matter at the end of each issue. So definitely something that I would recommend if you are a fan of that kind of modernized classic fantasy that we're getting a lot of lately. If there's anything else that I could recommend, well, it's very easy to just say things like Berserk. Obviously, is similar, although Berserk is a lot darker than the Fellspyre Chronicles. I'm going to be kind of having a look through my collection and having some thoughts and seeing if I can also do some sci-fi recommendations for American comics. And I'm sure that there are other fantasy series that I can look through and find to recommend. So this may end up becoming an ongoing series. But for now, that was the first episode, or only episode, of American comics for fantasy readers, The Last God. I would genuinely, I reread it today, especially for this video. It only took a couple of hours to read the whole thing because it's quite short. Well, not quite short. Comics are easy to read. Each issue is only 10, 15 minutes in some cases. There are prose sections at the end of each issue, but I did skip those on the reread because I'd read them all before. It's kind of like more history and more world building. Really interesting. I would imagine that fantasy readers are going to absolutely love it. Kennedy Johnson's world is really interesting. The magic system is fantastic because it's soft. It's a soft magic system. So there's no rules, there's no regs, there's just this the world kind of feels magical and spooky. The one thing that they talk about a lot is that magic has a price. So, for example, you might see that if someone uses magic to save a life, someone else might die down the line. Magic kind of takes back the price paid. There's some really interesting stuff with magical artifacts as well. Magical artifacts play a semi-large part in the story. Yeah, I'm kind of rambling here. What I want to tell you guys is take a couple of hours, take yourself an evening. If you enjoy a drink, get yourself a glass of whiskey and just read through The Last God. I would imagine it's available in libraries. I know it's definitely available on Kindle. It's where I read it. But you can also pick it up, the hardcover. And I actually think that I would like that hardcover on my shelf. So I'm probably going to invest in that personally. If you have read The Last God or Fellspyre Chronicles, please let me know what you thought below. If you're going to talk about spoilers, because this review has been mostly non-spoiler, this discussion has been mostly non-spoiler, I would say please clearly mark spoilers and give people an opportunity to avoid them. If you have read any other fantasy American comics or American comics that you think would really appeal to fantasy readers, then also pop those down in the comments. And if I've read them, maybe I'll turn into an episode of this series. If I haven't read them, then I'll read them and turn them into an episode of this series. So if you have something you desperately want me to read, then, and it's an American comic that would be good for fantasy and sci-fi readers, then definitely put it in the comments below and I'll try and give it a look. Thanks very much for watching this video. Please, of course, if you haven't left a comment, no pressure, but it'd be lovely if you would give this video a like. And if you're coming to this channel having never seen me before, then subscribe. There's going to be more comic content coming in the future, but this is primarily a fantasy, sci-fi and kind of genre booktube channel. So just to prep you, that's the kind of content that we're going to have. Anyway, thanks so much for watching and I'll see you guys in the next one.